Hello, everybody, and welcome to your post-daily news show for Tuesday, June the 28th. It is John Pollock alongside Wai Ting. Long time no speak. How are you, Wai?
It's been about 14 long minutes, John, since we've last spoke. Of course, today we are recording our edition of Rewind Away, traveling back to 2012 and TNA of 2012 specifically.
That's right. And if you want to invoke Option C, Option Cafe, the Post Wrestling Cafe, you can go to postwrestlingcafe.com, join, and you will get a full in-depth review of Destination X 2012, featuring the X Division on display. We're in the midst of Claire Lynch, the saga involving AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels. So a very interesting show, a lot of interesting news items going on that week from 10 years ago. So check out that, postwrestlingcafe.com, coming up tonight. Today's show, we're going to be diving further into the New York Magazine feature that came out courtesy of Abraham Reisman on Monday, outlining the initial allegations by Rita Chatterton that first surfaced publicly in 1992. She spoke to the outlet, as well as former wrestler Mario Mancini. So off the top, I do want to give a warning that we are going to be talking about this story, and we might get into the details of sexual assault. So I think right off the bat, we do want to give that warning to listeners and viewers that may not want to be listening to that. So that is going to be a big focus of today's story. So I thought it'd be a great time to bring back to the show David Bixenspan. You know all of his work at Between the Sheets and Fanbyte. Himself and Chris Zellner have been doing a series of in-depth discussions into Titangate, looking at the early 90s, the Ring Boy scandal, and ties in very much to this specific subject matter. Their third part of that series is coming up later this week at patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets. David Bixenspan is back here on the Post Daily News Show. Dave, thanks for taking some time to chat with us. Obviously, very timely that you guys are diving so heavily into this. This must be your entire world right now.
Yeah, I mean, we were recording the second half of that third part last night, same day that the story dropped. So that was interesting. I was glad at least that we hadn't finished recording it yet, before the story dropped, so we could at least talk about it.
In terms of just like researching so heavily into like the early 90s, do you see a lot of the differences in terms of just the overall coverage that this is getting now in light of the recent Wall Street Journal report on Vince McMahon, now this follow-up, and how it contrasts to a lot of the material you've been researching from that 1992 period?
Well, here's the big difference. And I think I brought this up when you had me on after I did the Ring Boys article for Business Insider. More so for the Ring Boys stuff specifically, but also to a degree in general, so much of the main coverage in 92 was, daytime talk shows, tabloid news TV shows, New York's, tabloidy newspapers like the Daily News and more so the Post, and wrestling media. Whereas, this story, I guess the overarching story so far, if we go back a few weeks ago, has been strictly national mainstream publications. It's two stories so far, but it's the Wall Street Journal and now New York Magazine, and it's public. That Brandon Thurston talked about on one of the WrestleNomics podcasts a couple weeks back, that there is another Wall Street Journal story coming. So, and that's one of the big differences. Another, and I'm gonna be writing about this for Fanbyte hopefully this week, is there was kind of I don't want to say signal to noise ratio problem, because that's not exactly the right way to put it. But in 92, there was so much different stuff going on at once that it was easy for something to get lost in the shuffle, because you had the extension of the steroid scandal, you had the Ring Boy side of things, you had the casting couch allegations, then you had this with Vince. When I say casting couch, I mean specifically the Pat Patterson, Terry Garvin allegations. Then you had Rita Chatterton's allegation against Vince. There's probably more I'm forgetting. Oh, the fixation on a Hulk Hogan doing cocaine that drives me and Chris crazy on the Patreon shows when we get up to that so many people are focusing on that at the time. So now, right, the big difference in terms of that is that the focus is strictly Vince McMahon and sexual misconduct. It's not, here are half a dozen different things that are all being talked about and often are being mixed up on the same TV shows and in the same articles. It's one specific overall topic.
Yeah, and I think when you go back and you look at a lot of that coverage, I mean, something that I believed was the idea that while pro wrestling, I think the sum is still kind of, the circus of live entertainment, that it's still at a completely different level than it was in 1992. But you look at the CNN segment that aired about 10 days ago, and you look at all of that B-roll, and it's like, here's this cartoon character in Vince McMahon that is being accused of this, and that it's almost like that is this cushion that he has, that you still are getting that tongue-in-cheek coverage of this. And are you surprised at all? And do you agree with that assessment in terms of the coverage that you have seen of the present-day stories?
I don't know if it's even just that, as much as, how do I say this without getting into too many details that I shouldn't give right now? As someone who's been talking to a bunch of editors about related topics in the last few weeks, including before the Wall Street Journal story dropped, I mean, there's definitely still a sense at a lot of mainstream publications that anything about wrestling, basically short of the biggest possible crossover people like a Vince or The Rock or Cena or maybe Roman Reigns, that anything, not at that level of name value is going to be too niche and maybe not worth investing time and money into as far as resources for investigation. So I think that's part of it too. Like for the past decade or so, I always kind of draw the line at Randy Savage passing away and then the CM Punk pipe bomb promo, and also Grantland launching in the middle. Ever since then, I feel like there has definitely been a much greater willingness to cover pro wrestling in some form, but in terms of devoting resources to actual serious issues relating to pro wrestling, not so much.
Right.
I'm just wondering, because this most, I guess, recent chapter in this entire thing involves a story that has been out there for many years, but I do question how much of the audience is even aware of so much of it, because it's been so long. So I'm wondering if either of you would be able to just give us a quick little kind of catch up for people who may not have necessarily read the New York Magazine article.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll let John do that.
Well, I mean, to summarize like the article, and this is like very much the Cole's Notes version of it. I mean, in 1992, Rita Chatterton had come forward and, accused Vince McMahon of sexually assaulting her inside of a limousine in July of 1986. And this was through the Now It Can Be Told show and the Geraldo Rivera show. What's new in this article is the fact that we have Leonard Inzatari, who wrestled as Mario Mancini, corroborating the story, stating that Rita Chatterton told her about this that same month and burst into tears retelling the story. And I mean, Inzatari certainly paints a very negative picture of Vince McMahon, very chilling line at the end alluding to that there was worse, but not going into detail. I guess it's worth noting that Chatterton did not go into the specifics in this article about what allegedly happened in the limousine, so they are relying on her interviews that she did in 1992 for the exact descriptions of this. And then there was, in 1993, the lawsuit filed by the McMahons against Rita Chatterton, Geraldo Rivera, David Schultz, the producer of the piece, as well as the production companies. And David, maybe you can speak a little about that lawsuit and what was alleged, because this was not just some blanket denial of the charges. Like they were alleging like a conspiracy here involving Rita Chatterton. And they go into great detail in the lawsuit, which ultimately doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's confusing. I mean, you linked, I think you linked the complaint in the piece you did Monday. because I think that was linked in the Talking Points memo story from when Linda was running for Senate. Just to get this part out of the way before we actually get into the details, my understanding of why it was dropped is, and this would also apply to the lawsuit against Phil Mushnick in the New York Post that was filed around the same time, is, the way they frame it now is they had to focus on the steroid trial. That's part of the truth. What had happened right before is that the judge had ruled in both cases that the McMahon/WWF side couldn't get a stay on discovery pending the conclusion of the steroid trial, because basically they were saying, and I can get the argument to a point, that Vince shouldn't have to go under oath when, at least in the Mushnick case, and to a degree also in the Geraldo case, it could be argued they were compelling him to testify against his interest to be under oath about related topics while the steroid trial was pending. The judge ruled against that, and shortly thereafter the cases were dropped. I have a copy of the Mushnick settlement, which was technically a settlement, but it was just a walkaway. There was no money that changed hands. I would think it was basically the same thing in the other case, if not just an outright dismissal without, even an agreement. But that was what was going on. It wasn't just, we need to focus these resources on the steroid trial. It was also that the judge had ruled, no, if you want this lawsuit to keep going, Vince needs to be deposed, as soon as possible. So the lawsuit, it's complicated. So the other thing that kind of stands out is it's not a defamation lawsuit. No. The lawsuit against Mushnick and the Post was a defamation lawsuit. Their main thing they were alleging against Geraldo and Rita Chatterton and company was a civil conspiracy, and also, intentional infliction of emotional distress and loss of consortium claims by Vince and Linda, which I'm not sure if we should or shouldn't get into what loss of consortium means, or people should just look it up. But that's what they were alleging, that they were conspiring to inflict emotional distress. And I did ask some lawyers on Twitter yesterday, and the consensus seemed to be the reason you would do that would be to limit the scope of discovery compared to what it would be in a defamation case, as far as what the defense could seek out in terms of document production and depositions and all that from the McMahons. And I did dig through, I was searching through with keywords because it's 2,300 pages, the whole file, and some of the defense lawyers did kind of say as much. At one point, they even pointed to a filing from the McMahon side and said that they basically admitted that they had crafted the complaint to make discovery less wide-reaching than it would be if it was defamation that they were alleging. So the very short version, and best way I can summarize it, is they were alleging that David Schultz and a private investigator he was working with, who was not a party to the suit, that they had met with Rita Chatterton at one point in the past, and that there may have been separate audio tapes of her telling the same story and a different story, and that there was all these people working together with Geraldo and his people, and that they maybe knew that she had changed her story, or it's a lot without just reading their actual complaint.
It's multiple pages of outlining this potential conspiracy that they're essentially trying to allege that they fabricated a tape to insinuate that these charges were a lie, that they're trying to allege here. And also noting in the lawsuit filing that someone contacted Titan Sports representing a TV show about these damaging tapes for Vince McMahon, and if the company wanted to buy them, essentially that they don't see the light of day. Titan allegedly refusing to participate in this, and also stating that Chatterton's side was willing to take $5 million to not speak publicly about it. So that is from the McMahon side of the lawsuit, right, of how they are trying to frame the plaintiffs.
So trying to refresh my memory on this a little, looking through some of this stuff, I did notice that so I was reading back through because it gives a decent summary of what they were alleging. Now that they had gone through discovery and stuff, that the affidavit that Jerry McDevitt filed when he was trying to get that stay on the discovery, there are phone records they point to as exhibits for Rita Chatterton talking with the Department of Justice investigator, but there's never any phone records about this call that they got, allegedly on the day of the Now It Can Be Told interview being filmed. So I don't know what to make of that. I mean, we need to stress they never got to the point where they would have needed to substantiate any of the stuff they were saying.
Right.
And, they went through discovery to a point. So, there are in the file, there are exhibits they file that are that include like memos between Schultz and his PI a few years earlier. But if I remember right, I don't think any of them mention Rita Chatterton. And, I could be wrong, but that's off the top of my head. So, it never got to the point where they would have been like, here's all this evidence that we have showing all these underlying claims we're making about this conspiracy. So how much you take with a grain of salt, I don't know.
In terms of Rita Chatterton's accounts of this, like it's mainly focused on the two interviews in 1992. The first of which was on Now It Can Be Told, which was kind of a news magazine style of show, which I remember first seeing when I had sent away for a tape that was just all these mainstream stories on the scandals at the time, and that was part of it, and that's when I first saw it. Now, the Geraldo Rivera in-studio interview is one that I had never heard until your show, and then this surfaced online on Monday as well. And I mean, the first time you're seeing the in-studio version, first of all, a very uncomfortable setting where you have a studio audience that is listening to this very graphic retelling of what allegedly happened in this limousine. But it also, like, there is a difference, I think, between reading about this story and hearing from her as well. And what were your observations, especially the first time you saw the Geraldo Rivera, the in-studio account?
So like you, I first saw Now It Can Be Told on a tape that had a bunch of the different scandal coverage on it. And I was pretty young when I first saw it. I don't remember exactly how old. And I'm not sure I was really sure what to think. And with hindsight, I think a lot of that was nothing she really said or did as much as the tabloid editing and music and all that, and how that kind of reframes it. I mean, people can check it out on YouTube. The one that's on YouTube of Now It Can Be Told, for whatever reason, it's missing part of the interview, but you still get the bulk of it and the most important parts. But you get the idea, especially like, I mean, we should probably briefly explain to people, since they don't really exist anymore, these tabloid daytime news shows, from the 90s. Like they're right? I mean, they're not really an animal that exists anymore. It's like, the best way I can put it is like, what if Access Hollywood was like intended to be hard hitting but very tabloidy, like news magazine show? Like I can't think of a better way to describe it. Can you?
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy to make. It's like, just in the context of today, where we have gone through the Me Too movement, to imagine it being covered in that setting, it's a big disconnect. I think, in terms of a forum to be like, just seeing Rita Chatterton in this studio, and we're getting away from kind of the magazine style show to the in studio one, but we're going to reaction shots, and it's just such a glaring setting to be pretty much recounting this in pretty vivid detail. And as well, like we should mention here, and I'm not saying this is right, but I think the fact that she is next to Murray Hodgson, just the optics of that is going to provide someone who is a skeptic of this story to question it, just given Murray Hodgson's lack of credibility as history has dictated.
Yeah, so I had first seen this it's within the last year or so that I had first seen a copy of this. And I had never even seen a trace of it on like Tape Traders tape lists or anything. For whatever reason, maybe because the whole focus was on wrestling on Now It Can Be Told, the Now It Can Be Told show was a lot easier to find. I had never even seen a trace of this. And once I had, gone back through old Observers and read about it, I was always curious to see it. Also, because it does come up in the lawsuit a bit, because besides just that she's making the allegation there, that a few days before air, Geraldo's people, or maybe the syndicator, sent out a fax to all the stations saying to bleep out when the word rape is used, which they, then came up in the lawsuit, which is just weird because that doesn't really change what she's alleging. But I think if you're gonna watch one, though, you need to watch this because she gets a lot more time. You don't have the music, you don't have the editing. It's her telling her story seemingly in more or less just one shot, and it's compelling. And with Murray Hodgson being there, yes, obviously him being there is an issue, as is also the framing of the show, which, as is discussed in The Observer at the time, basically everything else is just a circus, because most of the other people on this, sports sex scandals theme show are not talking about anything non-consensual. I think the only other topic like that is a woman who was, I think, doing a Penthouse cover photo shoot with Jose Canseco that I don't even remember exactly what she alleged, if it was just harassment. When I say just, I don't mean to minimize it. I'm just saying I don't remember exactly what she was saying. And other than that, though, it's, well, I guess you can say that's non-consensual in the other direction. There was Morgana, the kissing bandit, and talking about affairs and stuff. So it's mostly not really the same subject matter, and it surely didn't help. But if you just isolate it to Rita Chatterton's parts of the show, it's the best accounting you can find of what she was alleging. As far as Murray Hodgson, which, not to get too deep, but when your own lawyer goes on the record years later and says that you are a con man, then that says a lot. But the thing I think to look out for, and I mentioned this, on the second part of the Between the Sheets Patreon shows, it seems like sitting next to Rita Chatterton during this show completely flustered Murray Hodgson out of his smooth talking game he had been doing on all of these talk shows. This is a different Murray Hodgson than you've seen everywhere else.
So, Bix, getting back to this New Yorker magazine article, what does having this corroboration do for this case? Is there any chance that it could be brought back up, or is it strictly more of a PR thing at this point?
I mean, it's mainly optics. I would have to refresh my memory on what the latest law changes are in New York as far as if she could sue. Because I know there was the Child Victims Act, but I don't know if that applied to any, adult sexual abuse or sexual assault cases. But it's mainly just a public perception thing. But the thing is, and you guys can certainly attest to this too, in especially the, post Me Too era, a contemporaneous outcry witness is like the bedrock of what you're looking for in reporting on sexual misconduct. Like, that is huge. So it is a big deal. And it's someone you would expect her to have confided in, because she and Mario Mancini broke in together at Tony Altomore's wrestling school. It all fits. And I should also note, I forget the name of the show. Cheap Heat, maybe? There is on YouTube, there is an interview that Mario Mancini did yesterday where he talked about this a bit. So, I mean, you can see and hear him talk about this too, and he gets emotional. It seems difficult for him. So he certainly comes off as credible. And go ahead.
I was just going to go back to, there was an outlet, the Talking Points Memo, that went into this story back in 2010 during Linda McMahon's Senate campaign. And at that time, I mean, they received great resistance from Jerry McDevitt. And if you want to check out my story up on the site, I did include some of the comments that Jerry McDevitt made to the outlet. This time around, Jerry McDevitt did not offer comment here. Vince McMahon through WWE, they did not respond either to New York Magazine. What do you think of that decision that here has been, this story, like whatever you want to believe, like they have at least given a very strong public defense to the point of threatening legal action 12 years ago and opting not to participate at all here and put any kind of comment out there into the public. Is this the idea that we're not going to give any oxygen to this story? What do you think the thinking is on the side of Vince McMahon and by extension, Jerry McDevitt?
I'm not sure. I mean, I certainly think it could be that, but what's particularly striking about the contrast between now and 12 years ago is this. The Talking Points Memo story, as people can kind of see on screen, when you just had the headline up, it was explicit. Thank you for pulling back up. So the headline is Flashback. McMahon sued Geraldo for airing rape claims by former WWE referee. The story was explicitly framed as being about the lawsuit. And that's important for this reason. In a lot of jurisdictions, including New York, there's a concept called fair report privilege, where if you are reporting on the contents of court records, even if the thing in the court records is not true, you as a member of the media have that as a defense to potentially get a defamation lawsuit thrown out. So you have Talking Point Memo being extra careful by explicitly making this about the lawsuit, in a way where if there had been an attempt to sue them, it almost surely would have gotten thrown out. And yet still, Jerry McDevitt was basically saying, I will sue you if you do this story. And now he's not. And look, as someone who has gotten similar letters from Jerry McDevitt in the recent past about related subject matter, it definitely stands out, especially since, obviously there is the whole corporate component to it, but he did respond to the Wall Street Journal. Like, there's part of me that wonders if just that, since there's not much of anything that could happen legally here, if that's why maybe they didn't bother responding. But it's, I don't know. It is weird, especially, I mean, we should note that I don't know if this was ever explicitly stated, like, publicly in the lawsuit or not, in the course of the lawsuit, I should say. But Dave Meltzer has talked about how, when he talked to Vince at the time, that Vince indicated that something happened in the limousine, but he was saying it was consensual. Like, so if we're going by that, their side is not that nothing happened. Mm-hmm. Which, look, if you're going by that, that's also, it's 36 years ago, but it's also relevant to what's going on in the Wall Street Journal story as far as the abuse of power, the power imbalance, and all that. Even if you believe his side, still not exactly appropriate. It's still a big difference between that and committing a crime, but I don't think there's any way you can look at this story as just completely inconsequential, if that makes sense.
No, not at all. I think what it does is that to the public, it is whether this is establishing that pattern with sources on the record, with like, even if it is, you're looking at the power dynamic of is this something that was rampant as well that you're looking at here, and if this is just the ball rolling, that there are going to be other stories to come forward. And I wrote about it on Monday, but I think the next rock that people are going to look under is deeper into the whole Tanzabar allegation that came in 2006 that I know you've read the police report about that. I mean, that was like another incident of Vince McMahon being alleged to have groped an employee at a tanning salon that they ultimately did not press charges for. But I mean, the police report certainly like paints a picture, and it's not flattering to Vince McMahon.
Yeah, if people want to read, I did do a story at Deadspin about that you can link in the show description on YouTube. The gist is, so yeah, in 2006, and it came out in some local papers shortly thereafter. I think it was the day before the Royal Rumble. He went
Yes.
to a tanning salon in Boca Raton, where he has his Florida residence, and the tanning salon employee alleged that he asked her to take a picture of him for his quote unquote girlfriend in New York. Not going to elaborate on that. And then started showing her pictures of him naked. And then I forget if this was first, but also had went into the tanning area nude, even though he had been told it was a non-nude facility. And then in the middle of all this starts groping her and pulling at her clothes, and she gets away. And the police report, so it was, I just refreshed my memory on the story, and I was like, has anyone ever actually pulled this police report? It's Florida, so if it exists, you could get it easily because of the Florida public records laws. And I got it, and it had the phone numbers of the witnesses still in there unredacted, which I don't know if that's a Florida thing or a mistake. So I didn't turn it around right away, but in the meantime, someone else who ended up doing a freelance story for Daily Beast also requested it, and they had a story go up first specifically about the police report, which was newsworthy in and of itself because the police said there was probable cause to charge him. The prosecutors decided not to, and those records had been destroyed. Whether or not they should have been is questionable. I lay that out in the article, but yeah, but they said there was probable cause to charge him. And where was I going with this? So I reached out to one of the witnesses who was a then teenage at the time of the incident. Not when I talked to him. I think guy working the counter at a Papa John's in the same strip mall, and he had he was friends with the accuser, and he said the gist is she was scared, and he said that Vince went into the parking lot, went in his car, and specifically turned his car around so he could stare at her for 45 minutes while she waited for police to show up. And there are other things in there, confusion about whether or not there was any kind of surveillance and all that. But I mean, one thing I should probably note, I don't know if this pertains to the charging standard or anything, but I forget exactly what it was, but whatever assault charge groping would be in Florida, at least at the time, would not be considered a sexual offense. But not that that really matters in the grand scheme of things. But it was, again, it seemed credible. I'd like to know more about whether or not there was actually surveillance equipment. The police report doesn't really discuss whether or not they checked. So, yeah, but I mean, you have witnesses to her after being terrified. You also had the, I think it was her boss who talked to Daily Beast, who I didn't get to talk to, who it seems like both then and a few years ago was very dismissive of it for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, it always came off as fairly credible, and then especially once we had this, more credible. And should also know too that she lost her job at the tanning salon within a few days of this, seemingly because of making the police report.
It seems like I mean, just even in this relatively brief conversation, Bix, a number of stories out there involving Vince McMahon, and how much of it do you think has actually permeated to the casual wrestling fans knowledge? We see week after week now, this Vince walks out there and gets these big tremendous applauses, as if nobody was any the wiser to what was going on with him, and
or they don't care.
Or they don't care. But do you feel like any of this stuff has made that big of a difference to perhaps the general perception to Vince McMahon, at least as it relates to the casual WWE goer?
Like, As in right now, or as in the long haul?
I would say
right
at present, how much of this has, truly, reached like an audience that is really paying attention to this, that this has had any kind of meaningful impact on their view of Vince McMahon?
I think the existence of the Wall Street Journal story has hit pretty widely, but I think a lot of people haven't really read it or even read good summaries of it, because I'm sure you've both seen this to a degree. I keep seeing people who say, well, Wall Street Journal reported that the relationship was consensual. I'm not saying it wasn't. We don't know either way, but that's not what happened. That the
That was the
WWE
statement.
statement said it was consensual, yes. So that's not the same thing, and when you have
And it's also a larger conversation of, the head of the
power
company,
dynamic. Yeah.
the power dynamic, like what does truly meet the definition of consensual when you have somebody at the level of a Vince McMahon with in a relationship with a subordinate.
Right. And when we talk about that, we don't mean consent in the criminal sense.
No.
But in the moral, or however you want to put it, sense. And when you have the friend of the woman in question writing in that email to the board of directors that she was scared and passed off like a toy to John Laurinaitis, when you have that and you don't have them explicitly saying it was consensual, like, I see people saying, oh, people are choosing to cast this woman as a victim. Well, it's like, no, it kind of seems like her friend did that. With, you see that phrasing, you see, she was scared, passed off like a toy. Like, what are people supposed to think? But going back to the original question, I don't think those details and the actual order of them have permeated much. So it's mainly just been in people's eyes, did he have an affair? And, did he pay hush money? And how much of it was out of company money? When it is more complicated than that.
And the idea that they found other NDAs that exist as well. That's another key to all of it. And I think, like, what is happening is, I think that a picture is being painted, and the question is going to be if it truly can get through the many different layers of Vince McMahon, who, I mean, he has the right to his defense as well, to share his side of the story in all of this. But I mean, he is someone that is protected by so many different layers, and is going to have a company that is ultimately going to have to look at these stories of how many of these layers can Vince be protected by, and if these are going to be stories that, if there's going to be more to come, if this is going to be something that 2 months from now they have moved on and this is just bad publicity for the company that they go forward with. And ultimately, like, if a Vince McMahon is affected by this being, the second story to come forward, and if more exist out there.
I think the thing that would have the most impact is, outright of, a well-reported story about, something, more allegations that would be criminal in nature, would be specifically NDAs with talent or former talent, and the talent also being on the record with their names in the story. I think that's what would hit people the hardest. I mean, the day the Wall Street Journal story dropped, there was one, big name woman wrestler that I was talking to, and when I sent, she hadn't seen it yet. When I sent her the story, her reaction was basically, a paralegal, people aren't going to care. And I get where she's coming from. I mean, I kind of see it more as a shot across the bow more broadly, but I get that, I get where she was coming from on that, because if, I'm not going to throw a hypothetical name out there because that wouldn't be fair to whoever's name I threw out, but I do think a name and a face that people are familiar with being attached to something like this is what would hit the hardest. I also want to add, by the way, because I don't know if there would be a good time to really mention this. It was Brian Elliott who first, the former Fighting Spirit magazine editor, who quote tweeted this earlier, and then I shared it myself. I have no idea one way or the other if they did this on purpose for the reason you'd think, or it was a weird coincidence. I would lean towards the former. The WWE Careers account tweeted a video today about a woman who rose up through the company, who specifically, they talk about how she started as a paralegal and executive assistant. And that just came off strange to tweet less than 2 weeks after the Wall Street Journal article and a day after the Rita Chatterton thing, bringing more awareness back to the Wall Street Journal article. Like, obviously nothing against that woman who worked for WWE, but weird timing to pick someone who had those specific roles to feature.
It was very
one other name I wanted to bring up in all of this, because I know that you have discussed him, and it's kind of this, he has since passed away, but that is Vince McMahon's limo driver, Jim Stewart, and what you have learned about him in your research as well, and where kind of his proximity was of this alleged 1986 incident.
So it's complicated. There's more I refreshed my memory on in the last couple of weeks that actually I made a point of bringing up, even though I didn't really have a good opening for it on the third part of the Between the Sheets Patreon shows that's coming out later in the week. So you go back to the 92 coverage. There's some kind of conflicting stuff. Dave Meltzer writes that Stewart could corroborate everything up to the point where Vince McMahon and Rita Chatterton got in the limo. I'm assuming he talked to him. It's in the Dave style, so you kind of have to try to read into it. On the other hand, Phil Mushnick explicitly said that Stewart had corroborated the whole thing to him, and Jeff Savage in his Penthouse article, when he talked to both Jim Stewart and Rita Chatterton, it's very odd and awkward, but he kind of frames it in a way that suggests that Stewart corroborated the whole thing. It's hard to get a read on, and then I was looking back through Phil Mushnick's deposition from when they sued him, and he, at what first kind of, reiterates that it was a, full corroboration, and then they kind of push him on it more because Jerry McDevitt brings out a deposition with Jim Stewart from, I think, earlier in 93. So I think it was February. So it would have been right around when the lawsuit against Mushnick and the New York Post was filed. But obviously it wasn't from that lawsuit because Mushnick's lawyer would have known about it, because he brings up that McDevitt doesn't say what lawsuit it's from, and he never actually says into the record. But then he reads back from the deposition into the record, and Stewart says that he did not say any of that to Mushnick. He did not corroborate anything beyond what he would have seen outside of the limo and then them going in limo. And we should note, too, I don't think any of the previous versions included this detail, but it is explicitly mentioned in the New York Magazine story that Stewart left the limo
yes,
when Rita Chatterton went in. And Mushnick's side, when pushed on it, was he didn't remember all the details, and unfortunately he didn't really take notes, and that was an issue. And this is the best version you're going to get because it's a deposition like a year and a half after the fact. It was something to the effect of that he was going over various allegations and stuff with Stewart, and then when he got to Rita Chatterton, Stewart's response was something like, "Brother, I was there." And that was not the entire extent of what he said, but that was the thing that stuck out that Mushnick remembered most, and that how much of it was he felt it was a full corroboration, and how much he was saying Stewart explicitly corroborated, a little hard to tell. He didn't remember all of it. You get the idea. On the other hand, though, Stewart had sued, I forget if it was just WWF or also Vince McMahon in 91. And I'm guessing, if I had to guess, the 93 deposition is from his lawsuit, but you just don't know. One of the things he mentions in the lawsuit is being forced to witness the commission of crimes in the limo. So make of that what you will. His deposition, well, he has a previous deposition that is definitely for his lawsuit that I do have a copy of, but there's not much of any value to it because he basically says he's not going to talk about anything until he gets immunity from the DOJ in their investigation, because he was paranoid that he could say stuff under oath that would incriminate himself based on describing what he was saying he was forced to watch as far as crimes in the limo. So, I mean, that's probably the best summary I can give of that. But, and I'll say this, like, I don't know of anyone else other than a few people I've sent it to that would have that deposition. So if you go by what was out there in print, it is a little weird that what, these accounts of Stewart kind of corroborating it just kind of got forgotten over the years. But, as we've seen, because there was so much stuff going on, we talked about this with Mel Phillips and the Ring Boy stuff, how, Vince had admitted to Phil Mushnick and Dave Meltzer that he had previously, at a minimum, suspected that Phillips was a pedophile and fired him over it and then rehired him if he agreed to stay away from kids. And that just got forgotten for almost 30 years. So unfortunately, this happens. In part because many of the details are just kind of strewn about different places. And, New York Post doesn't really have any kind of online database. And some things might be recorded better in the more obscure wrestling newsletters that aren't online these days. So details get lost. But that's the best accounting I guess I can give of the Jim Stewart side. The other thing I should add, though, is he was supposed to be a witness in the steroid trial and then just no-showed. So that's Jim Stewart.
Yeah, certainly, a key figure, I would say, in all of this, kind of a background player as well. And I think for anyone that is covering like the current allegations, I think it is so vital to understand that early 90s series of scandals to truly understand. And David's someone that can, knows it inside and out when it comes to kind of what is going on today, because there are tie-ins, and Rita Chatterton speaking this week is evidence of that. So as we wind things down, David, we mentioned it off the top, but you and Chris Zellner have been diving into all of the Ring Boy scandal, all of the coverage. For those that have not heard any of this, I highly recommend you do so at patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets, where if there is a television segment, a written word, they have devoured it and have gone through in meticulous detail about every ounce of coverage and what we can learn from it 30 years later. So you guys are 2 parts in, and the third part is coming up this week. So what is the central focus of part 3?
Part 3, one of the main things that it covers is the episode of A Current Affair that covers the scandals. And I'll actually briefly use that to segue into something that's directly on point here. We go into it in more detail on the show. I had completely forgotten about this. People want to check it out for themselves on their own. I believe it's the May 11th, 92 issue of The Observer. Apparently, there was someone claiming to be a former wrestler that reached out to Geraldo's people, backing up Rita Chatterton, saying that he had previously heard the story from her. And then someone using a very similar name that was apparently the same person was put in touch with A Current Affair by Jerry McDevitt to refute it and say she had told a different story in the past, and then he disappeared. Yeah. So
nothing strange about that.
No, not at all. I had completely forgotten about that, and it's also interesting in light of the stories that would come out later, with regards to the steroid trial and Marty Bergman, the secret then fiance of one of Vince's lawyers, going to different media people, sometimes pretending to be, someone trying to get dirt and fight the WWF, and at other times making it more clear that he was, in some way affiliated with or helping them. I have no idea if he would have been involved then, but that's something that we cover on this one. And A Current Affair also features the whole thing with Murray Hodgson writing a letter to Vince McMahon right before a current affair aired, begging for work while his lawsuit was still pending. And, we read the whole letter and we get more into that. And, we talk about, how, again, just kind of the unraveling of the whole Murray Hodgson thing. And what else do we have?
Who's such a damaging figure, I think, to anyone that is coming into this and trying to cover this industry that they're not familiar with. Murray Hodgson just discredits so many others that I think it just gives you an open door to dismiss everything based on him. Like I think he's a real detrimental figure when it comes to historically that time period and all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you also think about it this way with, also Superstar Graham, who later admitted that, he made up the thing about seeing Pat Patterson grope a ring boy. I'm sure it's so rare that someone would have a false allegation of sexual misconduct against them, much less two, that it's clouded so much just about Patterson. Because there are compelling allegations that are credible against Patterson, from Tom Cole, from Barry Orton. But because you have these two clearly false allegations out there, it completely muddies the waters, and understandably so. Especially because those two were seemingly gay panic allegations. So we talk about that. We have some more Mel Phillips stuff, including we read columns from, I think both from Pro Wrestling Spotlight newsletter, one from John Arezzi talking about his past friendship with Mel Phillips in the 70s and the things he witnessed at the time that, especially in hindsight, were concerning. Also a column from Bill Kunkel, where he talks about, what he would have been privy to in the 70s. We have a lot about the unraveling of the John Arezzi Vince Russo relationship that led to Russo getting into the business, which, adds on to the Russo show we did years ago. This is stuff we didn't have at the time. So we have Russo's side of it that he gave to Alex Marvez. We have Arezzi giving a timeline of everything and how their business relationship broke up. We have, we play the newer parts of the current affair segment. We have various WBF stuff. We talk about, Kerry Von Erich going through rehab and how that kind of plays into everything, and just, how different it is to see a sober Kerry Von Erich in some of the videos from around that time. Barry Orton doing follow-up interviews. Tom Cole's brother, Lee Cole, alleging that there may have been an effort to get him arrested on an outstanding warrant that should have already been cleared up. So there's a lot there. So patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets, $5 a month tier or higher. We also have the annual plan, which is $50.40 a year, 16% off. So yeah, this is going to be part 3 coming out this week. We're still not sure how many, because the wall-to-wall coverage kind of slows down starting around where this episode ends in like June 92. But our plan is basically to go through when Ultimate Warrior and British Bulldog get fired for trying to import growth hormone in November 92. So there's definitely going to be a part 4. Whether or not there's a 5, we'll see as I get the notes done in the next few days.
Yeah, it's extensive research that Chris and David have put into these shows and all of their shows. I don't know what your Dropbox plan is, Bix, but it's got to be astounding what you have on your backup. But thank you so much for joining us. I know this is a very complex story, and we tried to lay it out as best we can, but there's just so much to it, and it's a big question of what we might be talking about, if there's more to come or not. But a great resource is David Bixenspan, so you can follow him at David Bix on Twitter. He's also writing for Fanbyte, and of course patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets. And David, thank you so much for taking an extended time out. I did not couch this as we could cover this in 15 minutes. I knew this would be an extensive chat, so thanks for earmarking an hour for us today.
No, of course. We've done enough of these shows where you thought we could do something in half an hour, and then every time it's well, why did we think we could get that done in half an hour?
There's no time limit when we have Bixenspan on, so it's always great because it requires the time. This is not something you want to be racing through. So I appreciate you parsing through a lot of the specific details in all of this. So that is going to wrap things up. We are back tonight with a new edition of Rewind Away, chatting TNA Destination X from 2012, so you can check that out. PostWrestlingCafe.com. We're back in this same time slot on Wednesday, and you can check out everything at PostWrestling.com. And that is going to do it for today's Post Daily News Show.